the two players here. And for the matchup, we mentioned before, Jeskai Black for Tom Ross, for Jim Davis, the only green-red Eldrazi player here. And Jim actually with a very creature-heavy build of green-red Eldrazi. Some bold statements here. Has his 4 Jadi offshoots, for example, in the main deck to complement what I guess would normally be a more pure ramp strategy. So he has, I think he's giving more, I guess, respect to the aggro decks in the room.
Yeah, and the aggro matchup, I've played a lot of Atarka Red. I played a lot of Atarka Red online. And the Eldrazi matchup always feels strongly in my favor. So trying to do some work game 1 to improve that matchup, not a bad call, although this room is very light on Atarka Red and landfall style strategies.
Yeah, I believe Jacob Wilson, the only player on it, and was eliminated in the wild card. So we're underway. Tom Ross is on a 6-card hand for the game. We'll see how that one pans out. For Jim Davis, and we talked about this in the main deck, it's a turn 1 copy of Jadi Offshoot. Now, this is something that's normally in the sideboard.
I've seen it both ways. And this is not the first time I've seen the card in the main deck. I don't think it's enough to really appreciably change the matchup against aggressive strategies, but it doesn't do horrible work against some of the builds of Jeskai that are more focused on not Seeker of the Way.
Soulfire Grandmaster.
Soulfire Grandmaster, excuse me. As is at least some sort of block early on in the game.
And we do see for Tom Ross, it is that turn 2 Soulfire Grandmaster. So he'll have the play, but maybe won't be able to swing through Jadi Offshoot. And Jim doesn't really need to be concerned about the life gain that this will represent.
No, when Jim gets a hold on this game, he's going to have it locked up. So if Ross goes up to north of 20, that doesn't really matter all that much once Jim starts playing cards like Ulamog and Ugin.
For Jim, the ramping begins. It's a turn 2 Shrine of the Forsaken Gods into Sylvan Scrying. Shrine, an interesting card in this deck in that it's a ramp spell, but it's not a ramp. It comes on very late in the game.
But it does give the deck a degree of redundancy alongside the other lands. So this deck is often trying to hammer you with large threats over and over again once it gets to a particular point. And Sanctum of Ugin and Shrine of Forsaken Gods are part of that package.
Now we see Jim picking up a 2nd copy of Shrine of Forsaken Gods off the Sylvan Scrying. Once he gets 7 lands in play, those will tap double for colorless spells. So we go back over to Tom Ross. See hand here, double Painful Truths, 2nd Soulfire Grandmaster, and Fiery Impulse at the ready for him. You see the 2nd Grandmaster added to the table. He'll pass back. And right now, Jadi Offshoot, maybe not for this matchup, but it's doing good work here in protecting Jim.
Yep. Between landfall triggers and blocking 2/2s, it's definitely been worth a card thus far.
We go back over to Jim. He's on Eldrazi. We see the target in his hand ramping up. He's ramping up toward it. It is a copy of Ulamog. Explosive Vegetation as well. I think just lands alongside those.
I believe a Dragon Lord Atarka as well in hand. So another big play to play towards. And the curve is very nice there. Your Explosive Vegetation, then you're threatening to have a Dragon Lord Atarka available the next turn. Also, your Shrines are turned on when you hit land number 7.
For Tom, the draw was Fiery Impulse. Still having trouble getting in damage at Jim. Jim is at a healthy 21 for Tom. 2 Painful Truths, 2 Fiery Impulses. And we'll go with a swing with the Grandmasters. 2 damage will get in, putting Jim to 19. And for Tom, he'll have to reload. And game 1, we've seen this in the past. Jeskai Black does a great job of controlling the game, but it oftentimes has trouble when it's forced into this aggro role that Tom has to play.
With no Mana Spiders in the deck, it's not something that the position the deck can take very naturally. You're expecting, with cards like Treasure Cruise and Ojutai's Command and Kolaghan's Command, to have a better late game than most of the mid-range opponents you're going to be playing against. That's just not the case against someone with Ugin and Ulamog in their deck. So this position is very awkward for Tom in the matchup.
Yeah, you look at Tom's creature base. He has 4 Soulfire Grandmaster, 2 Monastery Mentor, 4 Jace, 1 Tasker. That's actually it. They've gone as far as to play main deck copies of Roast. And you figure in an Obs on aggro metagame, this would be a great choice, but I feel like Tom may have been meta'd here.
Well, this is the reason that Jim's doing what he's doing. He thought the deck list would look something like this, especially with the success that Tom has had with this deck in the format, the fact that Brad and Tom have been working together, the fact that you would expect those players to be making deep runs in the second day. Jim, like we said, he's rolled the dice here, But if the field looks like Tom Ross's deck, this is a great call.
A Painful Truth into Fiery Impulse finished off Jim's Jaddy offshoot. So now the coast is clear for damage, but Tom's going to need to get it in quickly. Jim's turn 4 play was an Explosive Vegetation, ramping him up to 6 lands. A 7th land, and he should be able to just power out with those Shrine of the Forsaken Gods.
Yeah, a lot of good options next turn. He can play a Mountain and Dragon Lord Atarka, or a land and any variety of large colorless spells next turn.
We'll see just what Tom can do. He'll go for a 2nd copy of Painful Truths. You see he's picked up some interaction. I believe he had a Kolaghan's Command that he'd picked up last turn. A copy of Crackling Doom. More lands now off this Painful Truths. He has a full grip. But it's not quite clear what he's looking for to compete with Jim's late game of Atarka into Ulamog.
The Crackling Doom gives him a little bit of wiggle room, but if the play here is Ugin, I don't think Ross' hand really has anything to do about that.
We'll see the direction he goes. Now, in the main deck, we don't see any copies of something like Negate or Disdainful Stroke to really keep Jim off balance. He's heavy on removal spells, but that's not as good against Jim's cards. They all enter the battlefield and kill things.
Yeah, you're looking for Negates, Disdainful Strokes, Ojutai's Commands. Those are the best cards to keep Jim off the top end. The spot removal spells, and some of these are very low impact spot removal spells, just don't line up very well in this matchup. The other ends are also fine, but unfortunately, a lot of what Jim plays enters the battlefield and does something extreme, even if it's killed right away. Ulamog is killing 2 permanents, Ugin's wiping the entire board. So even if Ross has one of his answers, and he doesn't really have all that many answers to begin with, Jim can do a lot of damage with it.
Yeah, it has to be really counter spells are at a premium here. So for Tom, now the coast is clear. The Soulfire Grandmasters will get in for 4. He has Jim down to 15. And we'll follow up with a Treasure Cruise. But the coast is clear, Tom. No mana up. I believe because of deck list, Jim actually knows there's no counter spells, so he'll even have to play around.
Yep. Yeah, deck lists are public throughout this entire event, so Jim knows exactly what Ross can do to stop his large plays, and he knows there just isn't a whole lot.
You see Tom discarding to hand size and passing back the turn. So coast is clear. Tom, 2 Grandmasters tapped in play, 5 lands, all tapped. And for Jim, you mentioned we have a Dragon Lord Atarka hanging out, I believe, alongside Ugin and Ulamog.
Yep. Yeah, and this is going to require, each one of these threats requires an answer, or Ross is basically dead on the spot. And Ross doesn't have a whole lot of answers to each of these cards individually. The Dragon Lord Atarka is the easiest thing to answer, but Jim gets to kill 2 creatures on the way in.
And here's Dragon Lord Atarka. You mentioned it. 2 damage to each of the Soulfire Grandmasters. That'll clear the board for Jim. Now the 8/8, the only creature on the table. So we go back to Tom. He does have kill spells at the ready for Atarka, but it cost him his whole board nonetheless.
It's hard to weather the storm of 2 things die, kill that, go. 2 things die, kill that, go. Especially if you ever fail to kill one of the thing kills you right away.
We'll see how Tom wants to sequence. He has to be careful with his removal spells to make sure that he can line one up to each of Jim's threats. Now, we looked at Atarka. Ulamog, Crackling Doom actually can take care of an Ulamog. Ugin is the hard one for him to answer, I believe.
Yeah, he's got 2 copies of Utter End in the deck. So that's his clean answer to all of this stuff. But he's very light on answers to Ugin. I would imagine the Dragon Lord Atarka is going to be hit via Murderous Cut, because Murderous Cut doesn't line up with a lot of the other big plays.
And the saving grace for Tom is that while Jim has a decent job of ramping, he hasn't found a card like Sanctum of Ugin yet. So if Tom can just kill these 3 threats, there's a chance he can run Jim out of gas.
Yeah, although the problem is that Jim has also picked up a Den Protector as well, so that's going to be another round of this.
That is going to be a tough one. For Tom, the play is Soulfire Grandmaster and Jace Vryn's Prodigy. Leaves 2 mana up. Does have a Murderous Cut available here. As we go back over to Jim Davis. His pickup, he has a 1 of basic planes in the deck. That was picked up here. Now, I don't believe he has white cards in the main deck. That's just for some sideboard.
Hollowed Moonlight in the board.
All right, we're going to pause here, bring you back to the booth. Jim, having a judge question, which he's going to go ahead and take away from coverage here. Now, want to talk about just this matchup in general. You talked just how important it was for Jim to be able to really get a great meta call here. Now, there are some decks that are really a kind of a kryptonite for Eldrazi Ramp. It's why we haven't seen it. When you look at something like Hallowed Moonlight, that to me speaks of a rally matchup.
Yeah, I don't think the rally matchup is particularly good for this deck, nor do I think the Atarka Red matchup is good for this deck. Just doesn't really do anything until turn 5 at the earliest, so the decks that do incredible stuff turn 5 or earlier are going to be challenging matchups.
Atarka will come into the red zone. It hits big. Tom goes from 22 down to 14. And there is no letting up here for Jim. He'll play a Plains. That is enough lands that those Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, they tap for 2. So off 8 lands, he's able to cast Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger. And for the second turn in a row, Jim will make a large threat that kills 2 of Tom's creatures.
And you can see how Jim is prioritizing the matchup here. He knows there's only just so many ways in this Jeskai Black deck to win the game. So if he can ever just kill 2 creatures at a time, he's going to keep doing that.
Murderous Cut will take care of Atarka on end step. Tom has one of the 2 answered. We go back his way. Ulamog, tougher to answer. I believe Tom does have the Crackling Doom necessary, though.
But, that's put it in the graveyard, and Den Protector is still eligible. It's crazy. Ross has cast 2 copies of Painful Truths and a Treasure Cruise, and he is running out of stuff to do.
Yeah, well, each of these creatures is trading with 3 of Tom's cards. It gets 2 creatures on the way down. It gets a removal spell to take care of it. So, in a sense, right, Atarka is Jim's own copy of Treasure Cruise.
Yep.
For Tom, it's a fetch land and a pass. He's going to wait to Crackling Doom until Jim goes to attacks so that Jim can't cast another Ulamog pre-combat at least. And it looks like, yeah, here's the Crackling Doom. That will take care of the indestructible creature. Jim taking 2. He'll go to 13. Now, is there a chance? Can Tom sneak across maybe with burn spells? He's got Jim to 13. It's a tall order.
Not the way their deck is constructed. It's very unlikely. A lot of the burn spells in here, what look to be burn spells are Fiery Impulses. He's got 2 copies of Roast. There's just not a lot of burn meant to go at the player. It's just creature removal, which is, again, this deck's trying to beat other mid-range strategies, but these cards line up very poorly in this matchup.
Right, with Tom Ross's build, you would expect he'd be better than normal against maybe an Obs on aggro deck?
Yeah.
For Jim, it will be Explosive Vegetation. I believe he picked up a Map the Wastes for the turn as well. Two more basics into play. What Tom has to hope is that Jim has no more threats. Jim will play a face-down morph. And you see there, heads-up play by Jim, Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, not just for Eldrazi's.
Morphs as well.
He'll pass. Hoping to dodge something like Ojutai's Command on the Den Protector. It looks like he has. Tom on end step is going to go ahead and Crackling Doom to get back Soulfire Grandmaster and deal 2 to the morph. Or rather, sorry, discard and get back Soulfire. So he's not going to go for the morph at all.
He's got a Fiery Impulse. The Fiery Impulse lines up with the morph, so there's no reason to use the Kolaghan's Command that way.
Now, Soulfire Grandmaster is interesting. That's actually Jeskai Black's late game in this matchup.
Yes, Soulfire Grandmaster on top of Kolaghan's Command or the right type of removal spells like Utter End or Ojutai's Command can allow Ross to stabilize against the large plays that Davis makes.
Well, we'll go back Tom's way. He's going to try to set up maybe that Kolaghan's Command Grandmaster lock you're talking about. The one thing that seems to be slipping through right now is the Den Protector that's in play for Jim.
On top of that, Jim has just been sitting on Ugin the whole game. He's waiting for Ross to deploy enough to the table where Ugin wipes it all up too. So it's not like Jim is out of large plays. And I think the reason that he's trying to sit on Ugin for as long as possible is because of Monastery Mentor. That's a card that can win the game on its own in this matchup. And Davis is trying to keep that in his hand for as long as possible and wait for Ross to deploy the Monastery Mentor.
So, Soulfire Grandmaster plus Monastery Mentor for Tom. You're exactly right. Mentor as a 2-of the main win condition in this Jeskai Black build that Tom's bringing to the table. And if you're on Tom Ross's side, I believe, yeah, he knows the morph is Den Protector. No copies of Rattleclaw Mystic in Jim's list. And he'll pass Jim, opting not to unmorph.
Yeah, I think that he plans on playing Ugin this turn, so he might as well keep the morph colorless if he's going to minus.
And here is the Spirit Dragon. That's Ugin. 8 mana on Jim's side, able to leave up 4. And it's going to be, I believe, a -3 here. So Jim hoping to exile away both Soulfire Grandmaster and Monastery Mentor.
And this removal exiling is so punishing, too, because one of Ross's ways of getting some traction back in the late game is by recurring Soulfire Grandmaster with Ojutai's command and then setting up some sort of lock with one of his powerful spells. The fact that they keep getting exiled is really problematic.
So Ugin mops up the board for Tom, and the face-down morph swings in. Tom now down to 10 as Jim will unmorph, getting back that copy of Ulamog. And the hits keep coming for Jim Davis. First was a Tarka, then Ulamog. Now it looks to be Ugin and another Ulamog. Tom able to answer the first 2, but it seems like these ones may run away with it.
Yep. You can stop the first 3 10-mana plays, but the fourth one is likely to do you in.
Ugin will up. Tom goes down to 7. Den Protector will swing. Tom down to 4. And Jim looking to close out game 1 here in our wild card match. Jim Davis, yesterday evening, able to make it into Standard. You know he liked his deck for Standard. Had to really thread a needle to get to play today. For Jim, he'll just continue to ramp, though it looks like the board plus that Ulamog he got is going to be good enough. And Tom is down to 1 draw. Does he have something he's even drawing to here? You know,
I mean, in theory, he can chain together a draw spell into Ojutai's command, set up Soulfire Grandmaster plus Utter End, but I think in reality, he's drawing to almost nothing.
And Hanger back on 5 for Jim Davis, just as an insurance policy. It's a good sign, you know, and that's your backup plan.
Right. I got Ulamog back in the chamber if I need it.
Right.
Hanging back for 5 is my, that's my safe play.
So game 1 goes to Jim Davis and Green Red Eldrazi. He's up 1-0 over Tom Ross. We know game 1 was going to be favored for Jim, and when you talked about this matchup in our pregame for it, you mentioned that the Jeskai Black players in the room were not normally as prepared as they would be. Tell me about Tom's sideboard.
He's got Dispel, a Kolaghan's Command, 3 copies of Negate and 2 copies of Obnixilis, 2 copies of Duress, another copy of Painful Truth, 3 Radiant Flames, and 2 copies of Roast. I think he wants the counter spells in this matchup. Obnixilis does a little bit of work too. The 2 copies of Duress are great, and I think the additional copy of Painful Truths, because Jim's not really taxing his life total, get some of the shocks out of the deck and have a little bit better late game and more interaction.
So you're right, Negate, Duress, these things are good in the matchup, but as you mentioned before, there's no copies of Infinite Obliteration that we would normally expect here. So that I would imagine has to change the way they approach the matchup.
Yeah, that's usually the big trump here is Infinite Obliteration. You can recast it several times with Soulfire Grandmaster. There are only so many creatures in the deck, and if you have some counter spells or Utter Ends for Ugin, you can run the deck out of threats. But I think that Tom and company were not expecting this deck this weekend and cut the Infinite Obliterations for more stuff for the mid-range matchups. All
right, on Jim Davis's side of the board, he has a Den Protector, a Desolation Twin, a Void Winnower, so a lot of different Eldrazi at the top of that game. Hallowed Moonlight, Rending Volley, Winds of Kalsisma, Dragonlord Atarka, Radiant Flames, and Roast. What do we like here?
I like the 3 copies of Rending Volley a lot in this matchup. I like the additional copy of Den Protector because sideboard games typically just get slower. And I think this is a fine matchup for Desolation Twin as well.
So why Desolation Twin instead of Void Winnower? We're looking to add another Eldrazi at the top.
Because Void Winnower can just get countered. And Desolation Twin, at least you're getting the trigger. The Jeskai Black deck has a lot of 2-for-1s and 3-for-1s built in. I think it's important for Jim's top end to run them out of stuff. And Desolation Twin is a good card for running them out of stuff.
Yeah, so you get the extra 10/10 token on cast. And actually, when I'm looking at Tom's list, I don't know how many ways he actually can just kill a 10/10 token.
Yeah, he's got the 4 Crackling Dooms, but you can tell those are already taxed answering Dragon Lord Atarkas and Ulamog. So yes, he can answer it, but he's only got so many answers for the large plays, and that requires 2 answers.
Yeah, I mentioned there's 2 Utter Ends that could also remove a 10/10, but those to me seem well overtaxed. We talked about ways that he could answer Ugin, maybe even, there's a lot of things he needs to Utter End here.
Yes, and then post-board Tom gets access to Duresses and Negates, and that helps a lot, at least with the Ugin problem, but he is still left with not that many clean answers to Jim's top end, and all the threats require immediate responses, or Ross just dies.
So over at Star City Games in the month of December, we have been running our holiday sale all month long, as you should expect. That means we have different deals every week from now until December 1st. Right now, we have 50% off of select promos, as you can see here. So you're going to want to go head over to StarCityGames.com to get a chance at some of these. We have this one ends at Monday at 10:59 Eastern Time, and we have a new sale added this next week. So if you want these, make sure you go ahead and get them, and check us out next week to see what else we have sale. Learn more over at StarCityGames.com. Going back to the match, so some interesting history here between the players. So last year, Jim Davis had an early exit to the Players' Championship. It was on Saturday morning. However, he got eliminated at the hands of Tom Ross.
And we had the same thing happen last round, too, with Joe Lissette and Logan Mize squaring off. Joe eliminating Logan from the Players' Championship this year, and last round, Logan returning the favor.
So, and I have to think, these players, they play a lot against each other. At some point, you kind of get into a rhythm of it, but I feel like that's the kind of result that you remember, and maybe these matches matter a little more when you play them.
Oh, definitely. You definitely recall the players who have handed you some significant losses, and a field this tight, you get to really hone your scope in on the people that you're gunning for. You're going to get the opportunities if you make a deep run, because once you get to day 2 at least, it's nothing but single elimination matches. So assuming the people that you're gunning for are also doing well in the event, it is only a matter of time before you get to butt heads.
See Tom Ross, the 5th seed here. Started off the day undefeated, went on a losing streak at the end of the day yesterday to miss his chance for a round 1 bye. And now he's on the ropes. He's 1 game from being eliminated from the tournament.
Yeah, did not have a great run through the modern portion of the tournament. What that means in that sense is he has to play an additional round today. Wasn't able to get one of those buys. And that additional round that he has to play here might end up ending his whole tournament, as Jim has made a pretty gutsy metagame call, but one where I think he's happy with what he's seeing on the other side of the table.
So I have to ask, if you were Jim Davis here in this situation and you made it to the standard bracket and you saw that your round 1 match was against Tom Ross and you have Eldrazi in your hands, before you get to see the deck list, when you showed up to the table, I have to imagine if you're Jim, you're thinking, why Tom? You have to think, you might just get a Tarka Reddit out of the room here.
Exactly. You're thinking, all right, well, this was a good metagame call against Brad and Tom probably, but not, or Brad and Todd rather, but not Tom. But Tom decided to go with the team deck this weekend, and Jim's got to be happy about that because the Atarka Red matchup here is not great.
Well, we'll try to look at some of these post-board games. We have seen a lot of players really change this one around. I remember in Star City Games Philadelphia earlier this year, Todd Anderson, to top 8 the tournament, had to win 3 rounds in a row against Eldrazi. He lost all the game 1s and was 6-0 in post-sideboard games. Now, I know that they're less prepared this weekend, but it does show how the matchup changes.
Well, that was all about infinite obliteration. I mean, those matches... Todd was able to get the game to the point where the Eldrazi deck had literally no ways in the deck left to win the game. Without an infinite obliteration, the Duresses help, the Negates help. Those are a step in the right direction. But the dominance that we saw Todd Anderson have in the post-board games in Philadelphia, that's going to be hard to replicate because infinite obliteration was the card that was making that happen.
You see Tom on a mulligan here. He is on the play as he dropped game 1. But you're right, without infinite obliteration, I mean, it certainly is grindier on Tom's side to try to win this one. He's going to have to answer Jim's threats more honestly. He's going to have to answer them with removal instead of actually exhausting Jim's deck. And a pair of mulligans, it turns out. Jim also going down to 6. Now, for the green-red Eldrazi deck, we've seen, frequently in Standard an iteration of a ramp deck. The one thing that stands out to me about ramp is that whereas a lot of decks ramp into maybe 5 drops or 6 drops, this green-red Eldrazi deck, it has to ramp up to 7, 8, 10 in order to get there. So mulligans seem even more punishing than they would normally be for a ramp deck.
It's true, though there is some built-in redundancy here. There is a lot of searching in the deck, so there's a good chance you're at least able to get off the ground, but I think mulligans, if both players are going to mulligan, that's probably better for Tom than it is for Jim.
There's still some concern, I guess, on Tom's side that no matter how much they mulligan, Tom's deck's not particularly great at punishing Jim. Outside of these 2 copies of Monastery Mentor in the main deck, there aren't very many ways for Tom to put a clock on him.
Though the duresses and negates get a lot more punishing if Jim is taking mulligans.
Considerations from Tom. His hand does have both copies of Utter End in it, a pair of lands.
This is also a rematch from the modern pod play where Jim was playing another big mana strategy in red-green Tron, and Tom ran him over very quickly with Wild Nacatls and Curd Apes.
Jim, a rough tournament in Modern, had Tron in what we thought may have been a good pod, but I mean, you have to wonder who you're playing against. Did not win a match in Modern on the weekend. And with that, we'll go ahead and be underway with our game. Both players have kept on 6.
Yeah, Jim got a pretty good drawing there in the modern rounds with Tron, getting Zoo, which is a bad matchup, but Abzan and Jund, which are considered to be the incentives for playing a deck like Tron, but Jim unable to win a match.
That's why I see him as the last seed here in Sunday play. But even being the last seed, he'll have to win the most matches. He'll have to be on the draw for all of them. But if the deck works out just right, he can get around all that. A duress from Tom Ross will show what Jim's working with. Takes an explosive vegetation, leaving Jim with 2 more lands, 2 Hangerback Walkers, and a Dragon Lord Atarka. All the lands colorless at that. So this looks like it's going to be a slow start for Jim.
Although Ross here, I believe, missing his second land drop.
That's big, you're right. It looks like Ross kept a 1-land hand with Duress and Jace, Vryn's Prodigy. Certainly can't fault him for that. Jace a pretty important card in the match, but if he doesn't hit that second land soon, none of this is going to matter. And he misses for a second time. So Jim, with Hangerback Walker, has picked up a green source, lands for the last 2 turns. He's just going to slowly build his way up toward that Atarka.
And the worst part about this is, for Tom, is that even if he draws out of this, it's likely he's going to have to use the Utter Ends in his hand answering these Hangerback Walkers, and that's going to leave him very vulnerable to the top end of Jim's curve.
All right, well, on Tom's side, he does finally hit the land. It's a Polluted Delta, so he will get to play. We'll see if it's too late, though.
And Polluted Delta is, it's good that it's land number 2, but of all the lands that come into play untapped, perhaps the worst one of all, because it's not helping his colored mana situation.
Right, if he wants to cast the Jace this turn, he would have to get get another tapped land. Probably just can't afford to do that. He'll fetch for Swamp and make Jace Vryn's Prodigy. And he'll pass Jim pumping Hangerback up to 2. Go back to Jim. Now he's found some late game. There's a copy of Ugin the Spirit Dragon. So for Jim, the hand is an Atarka and Ugin, lands number 4 and 5. 2 shrines in play and a Sanctum of Ugin. So as soon as he hits that land 7, we are off to the races. And we'll see what Jim wants to do before that. He'll make a forest. I think debating swinging versus just pumping on these Hangerback Walkers.
I think it's a non-starter to be attacking with the 1/1 Hangerback Walker. I think, given the pace of this game, I just prefer pumping both. I don't mind going for an attack next turn because both of your threats are going to be larger than the Jason play. But this turn, I think 2 points of damage is just not worth growing both your Hangerback Walkers.
Yeah, Jim's gonna agree. They pump up to 3/3 and 2/2. So we work our way back over to Tom Ross. Draw for the turn was a basic mountain. Does actually now give him options. He could Painful Truths on 3. Still has that copy of Utter End. That one's uncastable until he finds a white mana source. So 3 mana will be 3 cards for Tom Ross. And you see 2 lands and a negate picked up for Tom.
Though I don't believe he has access to white mana yet. He's picked up a Smoldering Marsh and a Bloodstained Mire. Bloodstained Mire can't get white.
Right, it's the one color it can't find.
So Tom kind of drawing out of things a little bit, but now his life total is going to be under some degree of duress too.
Yeah. We'll see what he wants to do with the Jace. There's 4 cards in the graveyard, so Tom is reaching the point where he can flip Jace. Now, how much does he have to worry actually about a legitimate aggressive plan? Tom's gone to 15 off the Painful Truths, and if you look at Jim's side of the board, okay, he does have 5 power worth of Hangerback Walker.
It's a bit of a concern. I think it's on the low side. It's likely if Ross loses the game, it's just going to be to the top end still. It's a mild concern, but I think that Tom can't really worry too much about the beatdowns.
Jim's draw a good one. It was a copy of Den Protector.
Den Protector is perfect here because Jim's in the market now. He can make an attack, get another threat into play, get back the Explosive Vegetations. Explosive Vegetation takes him to 7 lands in play, and then everything's enabled.
Yeah, we talked about how exactly what Jim was wanting was 2 more lands. That card would do the trick. And here's an attack with the Walkers. Tom's side, he can block and turn Jace into a Planeswalker. And that's what we're going to see. Jace goes in front of the 3/3. It'll loot. Tom will draw an Ojutai's Command.
Ojutai's Command also good once Ross finds white mana.
Yeah, so we actually see the answer starting to line up, right? We have Ojutai's Command for Atarka. We have Negate for Ugin. So there are plays here. Now, still, and I know I want to touch back on this, is that, so maybe Tom can answer those late game threats, but I'm still concerned about a Den Protector plus 2 Hangerback Walkers actually just, doing the job of 20.
The Den Protector draw this turn was huge because it's just another threat in play, and Ross is going to be on the back foot a little bit. In his ideal world, he would sit back on his Negate and Ojutai's Command and wait for Jim to play into him. That may not be an option anymore. And if that starts happening, then the damage can add up.
See, the discard of the Bloodstained Mire, Tom in the market for white mana, means 2 damage will put Tom Ross down to 13. Jace will flip into a Planeswalker. And now here's Jim with the follow-up. We know he drew that Den Protector, so he'll fetch for land 5. Wants to make sure he gets that unmorph. And Den Protector is the face-down card, so an Explosive Vegetation, or maybe even a fetch land at the ready to get back.
Yep. It depends, I think, on what Ross does. If Ross taps out, I think you're going to see the Explosive Vegetation come back. If Ross is leaving up the mana necessary to cast a Negate, you just might see Davis play it safe and get back Wooded Foothills.
Well, here's a polluted Delta draw for Tom. That's the white source he was looking for as it can find his 1 copy of Prairie Stream.
But now the concern is, if you're in Ross's position, are you really playing land number 4 and saying go? Can
you leave up that Ojutai's Command?
There's a lot of information on the table there if you're doing that. Jim might say, all right, well, I can attack you or attack your Chase down, pass the turn back to you.
Well, he does have a copy of Utter End that he could use on end step, right? So I know he's taking a lot of damage, and this might not work, but it seems to me that things may line up for Tom Ross.
I mean, this draw was huge. Now with white mana and land number 4, a lot of his hand is unlocked.
We'll see just what he wants to do. Jace will shrink down the morph. Polluted Delta the play. That is the white mana he needs, and thanks to those basics he's gotten, it will come into play untapped. And Tom, there may be a glimmer of hope in this game.
This was the last window, I think, to draw white mana and have it be good enough.
Yeah. Sitting back on Negate, Ojutai's Command, and Utter End. As it looks, those may be able to answer Jim's threats. But you have to watch out. Cards like Sanctum of Ugin waiting on Jim's side. Well, we'll start here. Den Protector is going to unmorph on end step. It'll get back the Wooded Foothills for Jim. So Jim will be at the ready with land 6. To draw another copy of Ugin. So maybe some punishment on Jim's side by not getting Explosive Vegetation. He's a land off of casting anything.
Well, I think he respects the possibility of Tom being able to counter it. And land number 6 is 1 land away from land number 7, and then everything's good to go. So
yeah, land number 7 lets him cast literally every card in his hand. But without it, we have 2 Ugins and an Atarka. None of them are castable. The Ugin, though, should play well later down the road if we get to that point. From Jim, here's an attack. He has 6 power total, so I suppose he could go after Jace here if he wanted.
At least force the issue on a removal spell.
Sure. Looks like it's all going at Tom.
Yep. Well, this lines up. This makes sense to me. I think that if Jim had the intent of attacking down the Jace, he would have gotten back explosive vegetations. Attack everything at the Jace. If Ross makes some sort of move to protect the Jace,
then he'll tap out.
He can resolve the explosive vegetations. If he decided to just go get the land, I think he's saying, for now, I'm going to be ignoring the Jace. He's not really up to very much. I'm going to keep pressuring Ross's life total while he's not up to very much.
Tom will take the damage. It's a hefty 6, puts him down to 7, and now to 6 on end step. But here's that Prairie Stream. Tom Ross with an utter end. Now, he was willing to take 3 damage to not use that utter end inside of combat. Suppose he has to respect cards like Oblivion Sower.
Yep. Also may want to negate something.
Yeah, on end step he'll go ahead and negate and utter end away the large Hangerback Walker.
And I like Davis's line here of ignoring Jace, because if you look at the graveyard, there's an utter end, which is the whole turn. And there's a duress, no spells in hand. There's a painful truths, and Davis is pressuring the life total. So he doesn't really have to worry about the Jace for the time being.
On Tom Ross's side, the draw was a Smoldering Marsh. So it's another untapped dual land for him. And you see things are starting to add up. Crackling Doom alongside of Ojutai's Command and Negate.
I mean, there's a route here. It's just going to be an issue of the life total. Is Ross going to have to tap out inside of Jim's attack step to defend himself in such a manner that allows Jim to resolve some of his big stuff?
So Jace will shrink down the Hangerback Walker. Now that means that Crackling Doom, regardless of anything Jim does, would hit Den Protector.
Correct.
And that's pretty relevant. If Crackling Doom hit Hangerback Walker, Tom may not be able to stave off the damage from the Thopters. No end step play from Jim. We go back to Jim's turn. He'll untap. Tom is at 6. Jim 3 power in play. The big question, of course, is did Jim hit land number 7?
The draw step was another copy of Ugin. So a miss. Although, with Tom at 6, it's not bad to just be brute forcing Ugins for the rest of the game if you can find land number 7.
Right. So what it's looking like to me is that, you know, Tom had an awkward draw. It's a tough matchup. His out, and I know it sounds trivial, is that if Jim just misses land 7 for enough turns, Tom may be able to get his way through this.
Right.
The question, I guess, is how does Tom turn the corner? I mean, Jim eventually will draw the land.
It has to be something to the effect of Ojutai's Command, gain some life, flash it back, now I have a cushion, now I can start casting my stuff.
So an attack of Den Protector puts Tom down to 3. Jim passes the turn, and on end step, Crackling Doom will be cast on Jim.
Yep, and you can see, you know, Tom is willing to take a lot of lumps here, and these points are starting to add up in a major way to allow himself to leave Ojutai's Command up in the event that Davis finds one of his large creatures.
And here's another untapped land from Tom. This is going his way. Now, maybe the win con, we could be looking at a Jace ultimate even.
A slow way to do it,
yeah.
But possible.
I mean, he has nothing else. I don't believe he has another thing in play. That's up to, it's 9. It's within the realm of possible. Tom, Ojutai's Command, Negate, in hand. Treasure Cruise, 2 copies of Painful Truths.
But remember that deck lists are public here. If he flashes back the utter end and gets the Hangerback Walker off the table, at that point, the shields are down for any creature to resolve. Because Negate can't cover it, and he doesn't have the mana for Ojutai's Command. So if he flashes back one of the removal spells, the utter end, let's say, he's very vulnerable to land number 7, Dragon Lord Atarka. Now your Jace is down. Now you have to be responding on your own turn, and Jim still has a bunch of copies of Ugin left over.
So it's going to be a 1-mana Treasure Cruise from Tom. And he had to decide whether he wanted to leave Utter End or Duress left in the graveyard. Close call for him. He ended up leaving Utter End. In response to the cruise, Jim will pump the Hangerback Walker. And we see a slew of kill spells picked up for Tom. A land, another Crackling Doom. I believe a copy of Tassiger, so if we're looking for a way to win the game, that may do it.
It got to take a while, though, for Ross to get enough cards in his graveyard where he feels comfortable tapping low for Tassiger and leaving up the requisite counter spells to play back against Jim's follow-up.
Yeah, he did just have to delve away everything for the Treasure Cruise. Shambling Vent, though, that land was picked up from Tom. He'll be able to play Shambling Vent and leave up Ojutai's Command. Believe that is the play. And then he'll shrink Hangerback down to a 1-power creature and pass the turn. So once again, Tom gets to play another turn of this game.
Sitting on Negate, sitting on Ojutai's Command.
Has creatures covered, has non-creatures covered, at least for now. And he's going to need it. Jim hit land 7, so now we are green-lighted.
Though now we're hitting the stage where it's going to be hard, at least for a little while, for Jim to get his spells to resolve.
Three Ugins and a Natarka all in hand for Jim. Yeah, if you're Jim, you have to assume there's one, if not two, counter spells waiting out for you here. Tom's at 3. It's a tempting spot to go for an Ugin. Now I know that your expectation is low on Ugin working here.
Well, my preference is to lead with Ugin because it's just the more... It forces mana efficiency on Tom's side. If you tap out for Dragonlord Atarka, Ojutai's Command uses all of Ross's mana. It's a very efficient turn. If he's on Negate to answer the Ugin, there's a good chance he has 2 mana that's not doing anything. Sure. And then if he has to leave up Ojutai's Command again, he has to commit 4 more mana, and you have another opportunity to resolve one of the other Ugins in your hand.
Well, the first thing Jim will do is he'll use Hangerback to put Tom Ross down to 2. Hangerback, remember, a 1/3, not a 3/3 because of Jace.
Also, if you play Dragonlord Atarka, you don't kill the Jace, and if Ross just has a copy of Crackling Doom, he answers Dragonlord Atarka just fine.
It's a pretty clean answer. And Jim, he's lining up the cards here for threat number 1. Here's 8. It looks like it's going to be try number 1 at the Spirit Dragon. All of these are going to have to be countered by Tom Ross. He is at 2.
And he doesn't have a whole lot of counters for this in his deck.
No, first one's going to be negated. You see there were 3 copies of Negate in the sideboard. But you're right, with Tom at 2, Utter End no longer is an answer. You see Tom pick up that sideboard copy of Obnixilis.
Typically a good card in the matchup, but with the way this game is shaken out, Ross can't spend 5 mana to draw a card, and the only creature in play is not something he can kill with Obnixilis.
Yeah, I mean, it's feeling like Negate or Bust. I mean, if Tom wants to get out of range of that Atarka, he's going to have to do some clever play with Shambling Vent, it would seem.
Or he just has to Ojutai's Command to gain 4 and draw a card. And now Dragonlord Atarka is more likely to resolve in the subsequent turns.
Sure, it's not the way he wants to be using his Ojutai's Command, that's for sure.
You can see several copies of Painful Truth in hand, and those are not close to being cast.
Yeah.
He has neither the mana nor the life to spend that way.
Six lands in play. He has a Jace at 8. Remember, that emblem for Jace happens on 9. It may be a route to victory for Tom. He'll play land 7. Jace will go to 9 and shrink down the Hangerback Walker. And now we go back to Jim Davis. Game 2 here, closer than it first looked, with mulligans coming on both sides, but Jim may have taken the necessary steps to take it down. On our backup match with Alex Bestecki and Danny Jessup, Game 1 going over to Rally. That's in the hands of Alex Bestecki. We'll bring you that match after the conclusion of this one. Jim, a shrug. He's going to try Ugin again.
This is forces a Negate or an Ojutai's Command to survive the Lightning Bolt. If Ojutai's Command happens, that's a window for the Hangerback Walker to hit again.
Well, Tom says it resolves, so now we see counters on the Ugin. So he knows there's no Negate. There still could be an Ojutai's Command. Yeah, he'll do 3 to Tom. Let's see it. And that should force the life gain. Remember, the modes are counter a creature spell, gain 4, get a creature back, draw a card. So gain 4, draw a card is what's going to, I believe, Tom's only play.
There are a lot of opportunities in the last couple turns for Davis to get tripped up by Ojutai's command in a big way, but the way he's played it has made Ojutai's command pretty ineffective.
Now, if he was going for this play, Tom could have fished for a negate with this Ojutai's command. If he was going to gain 4, draw a card, then maybe negated the Ugin.
Perhaps.
As is, I don't think the draw helps him either way. I believe it's another land. So Tom will survive for one more turn. That he'll go up to 6. Ugin will put him down to 3. Jim could have swung for 1 with Hanger back, but he'll just pass for the moment. You see, the only castable spell for Tom's side is a Crackling Doom. Can't do that. So he'll draw for the turn, and there's the negate. If he can get this Ugin off the board, it'll answer the next one, but it's a tall order indeed.
He's got to be able to, and also answer the Hangerback Walker, and answer the third Ugin that's in Jim's hand. I mean, this is going to be tough to get out of.
Well, there's an Utter End in the graveyard. Jace could flash that back, but if Jace is flashing it back, then it's not keeping, then the hanger back is too large.
Correct.
So what does Tom Ross have in store?
It's just so many angles of attack, and Ross only has so much life and so much mana to work with.
Yeah, and I mean, it's difficult because the answers are there. When you look at his graveyard, his Jace, his hand, if he could get enough lands in play and have enough life points to play these cards, he could get out of this. But it'll take some serious finesse here if Tom can get out of the situation. We're going to start by a flashback to Utter End. That's on Ugin. 4 cards in the yard, it means Tasigur could block and negate could be up. It exists. Now, I know it's fraught with peril.
Well, this opens up the window for Dragonlord Atarka to resolve.
And that could do it.
Because you can't negate that.
If Jim's only other card was 3rd Ugin, this line would work.
Right, but I don't know if he's going to be able to beat Dragonlord Atarka this way.
Hangerback pumps to 4. Well, we'll see. So if Jim goes for Atarka, we believe he has it. If he goes for Ugin, though, then Tom's got a shot.
Remember, deck lists are public.
Can Jim find the right play? This should be for the match. Jim Davis on the left, Tom Ross on the right. Tom at 3. Ugin is lethal, but here's Atarka. Jim finds the right play. Tom has the negate, but you can't negate Dragonlord Atarka. It's a kill of Tasigur, and Hangerback Walker wins the match 2-0 for Jim Davis.
Got to be a satisfying win for Jim there. Not just winning and advancing to the top 8 and the extra $1,000 and all that represents, but you choose this deck. You play against one of the best players in the room who's playing a mid-range deck with nowhere near enough from the sideboard to handle what you're doing. So far, at least, Jim's metagame call has paid off.
For Tom Ross, a great run in Legacy and a great tournament, but that will be the end of the road for him, not pulling it in Modern or Standard. And for Jim, this might be a sign of good things to come. When you play against this kind of player and see just how well your deck is positioned, you have to wonder how far this run can go.